Picture a sea that stretches beyond the edge of dreams, where a single star burns brighter than the sun, guiding a people to a destiny both glorious and doomed. This is the tale of Numenor, the greatest kingdom of men in J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth, a land of towering cities and fearless mariners, where the ambition of mortals dared to challenge the gods. From its radiant dawn to its catastrophic fall, this is a story of hope, pride, betrayal, and the eternal yearning for what lies beyond the waves. Join me as we sail into the heart of Arda's most epic tragedy, where the land of the star rose to unimaginable heights, only to plunge into the abyss of legend. A gift from the gods. In the twilight of the First Age, when the lands of Beleriand lay broken beneath the fury of the War of Wrath, the world of Arda was reshaped in fire and ruin. The Valar, the divine powers who wove the music of creation, looked upon the Edain mortal men who had stood resolute against Morgoth's shadow and saw their courage worthy of a gift beyond measure. Far to the southwest, where the sea stretched vast and untamed, they raised an island from the depths. Its shores gleamed with golden sand, its hills bloomed with emerald forests, and its rivers sang with voices older than time. This was Numenor, the land of the gift, a paradise crafted for men to rise above their mortal bounds. In the year 32 of the Second Age, a fleet of weathered ships sailed from the shattered coasts of Middle-earth, their sails tattered but their spirits unbroken. Above them burned the star of Elendil, a Silmaril born into the heavens by the mariner who bridged the worlds of men and elves. At the helm stood Elros, son of Elendil, a man of both elven and human blood who had chosen the fleeting gift of mortality over the eternal life of his brother Elrond, his people. The Edain stepped onto the shores of their new home, their boots sinking into sand that shimmered like powdered gold. The air was sweet with the scent of unfamiliar flowers, and the waves whispered promises of a new beginning. Here they would build a kingdom to rival the songs of old. Elros crowned Tar-Míriel High, First Lord, became Numenor's first king, his reign stretching across 410 years of peace and wonder. The Númenorians were no ordinary men. Blessed by the Valar, they grew tall. Some whispered they stood 7 feet or more, their eyes sharp as hawks, their lives spanning centuries. Their cities carved from white stone, quarried from the cliffs of Orfalch-Ekor, rose like dreams against the sky. None was more radiant than Armenelos, the city of the kings, its towers crowned with domes of silver and gold. At its heart stood Nimloth the white tree, a gift from the Eldar of Tol Eressëa, its silver leaves catching the light like stars fallen to earth. Nimloth was more than a tree. It was a living bond to the divine, a symbol of the grace that had brought them here. Life in Numenor was a tapestry of beauty and purpose. In the bustling port of Romena, fishermen hauled nets heavy with silver fish, their songs rising over the clatter of crates. Merchants in the markets bartered for pearls, spices, and silks from distant shores, their stalls adorned with carvings of dolphins and seabirds. Artisans shaped intricate jewelry, their designs inspired by the curves of waves and the arcs of constellations, while scholars in the great library of Armenelos pored over scrolls of elven lore, their quills scratching late into the night. Children ran through the streets, their laughter mingling with the chime of bells, dreaming of the day they'd sail beyond the horizon. The Númenorians held festivals that lit the island like a beacon. During the Erulaitale, the midsummer prayer families gathered beneath Nimloth's boughs, their voices weaving hymns to Ilúvatar, the one who had shaped the world. Dancers in flowing robes moved through torchlit streets, their steps mimicking the tides while bards sang of Elendil's voyages, their harps echoing the music of the sea. Thrice a year the king led a pilgrimage to Meneltarma, the Pillar of Heaven, a sacred mountain at the island's heart. The climb was silent, the air heavy with reverence as thousands stood beneath the open sky offering prayers to Ilúvatar. From the summit they could see the whole of Numenor, its cities gleaming, its fields golden, its seas endless. The sea was their true calling. Númenorian shipwrights crafted vessels of unmatched beauty, their hulls sleek as dolphins, their sails billowing like the wings of great birds. In the shipyards of Romena, hammers rang like bells, and the air smelled of pine and tar. Each ship was a work of art, its prow carved with figures of swans or stars, its timbers blessed by priests of Ilúvatar. The Númenorians were mariners without peer, their hearts drawn to the horizon. Yet a sacred law bound them. The ban of the Valar forbade them from sailing west beyond sight of their shores, lest they covet the undying lands of Aman, where the Valar and Eldar dwelt in eternal bliss. The ban was a whisper of caution, a reminder that even the mightiest of men were mortal. The call of the east denied the west. The Númenorians turned their prows eastward, their ships slicing through the waves toward Middle-earth. By the year 600 of the Second Age, their sails appeared on the shores of Lindon, where High King Gil-galad welcomed them as kin. The elves of Lindon, with their ageless grace and eyes that held the memory of stars, shared tales of the First Age stories of Beren and Luthien, of the Silmarils, of the wars that had shaped the world. The Númenorians, in turn, brought gifts of their own carvings of choral songs of the sea and the promise of alliance. Their laughter echoed in the halls of Lindon, and their friendship grew strong as the roots of Nimloth. Further south, they met the scattered tribes of men, descendants of those who had never fought in the great wars. These men lived in shadow, their homes, rough huts of wood and straw, their lives bound by fear of the unknown. They gazed upon the tall sea kings with awe, their languages distant but rooted in a shared past. The Númenorians became teachers, their voices patient as they showed these men how to sow fields with wheat, forge iron into plows, and build homes that withstood the storms. In the flickering light of campfires, they shared stories of Numenor, its white cities, its sacred mountain, its tree that glowed like moonlight. The tribes listened wide-eyed as if the sea kings were gods come to walk among them. Between voyages, the Númenorians returned home their ships laden with timber furs and tales of distant lands. In the taverns of Romena, mariners spun yarns of misty forests, starlit rivers, and the strange folk of Middle-earth, their voices drowned by cheers and clinking goblets. Children clamored to hear of these adventures, their eyes bright with dreams of the sea. In the great library, scholars recorded each voyage, their maps growing ever more intricate, their scrolls filled with sketches of foreign shores and unknown stars. In 750, Prince Aldarion, a man with salt in his blood and stars in his eyes, founded the Guild of Venturers, a fellowship of sailors who hungered for the unknown. His father Tar-Míriel watched with pride but cautioned restraint, for Aldarion's heart was restless, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Under his command, the Venturers built ever grander ships, their masts towering like the pines of Middle-earth, their hulls strong enough to brave the fiercest storms. Aldarion established Vignolande, a haven where the Gwathlo River met the sea, a foothold in the wild lands of Enedwaith. Its docks bustled with activity, its warehouses filled with timber and grain, its walls a promise of Númenorian might. But not all welcomed their coming. The native men of Minhiriath and Enedwaith, who called the forests their home, watched as Númenorian axes felled their sacred groves, the timber hauled away to feed the shipyards of Romena. The air grew thick with the scent of sawdust and resentment. At first the natives traded with the sea kings, offering furs for iron tools, but as the forests dwindled, their patience wore thin. Whispers of rebellion stirred, and soon ambushes struck the Númenorian camps. Arrows flying from the shadows, fires set in the night. The sea kings, once teachers, now drove the natives deeper into the forests, their friendship replaced by dominion. The men of Middle-earth, now calling themselves the Dunlendings, nursed their hatred, a wound that would fester for millennia, fueling conflicts as late as the War of the Ring. Back in Numenor, the people knew little of these tensions. In the shadow of Meneltarma, families gathered for the Erukierme, the spring prayer, their voices rising in harmony. Artisans unveiled new sculptures, great swans of marble that adorned the fountains of Armenelos, while poets recited verses of the sea, their words carried on the breeze. The white tree stood tall, its leaves shimmering in the sun, a reminder of the divine favor that had shaped their destiny. Yet even in this golden age, a shadow loomed, a whisper of envy, a question that would one day undo them all. Why must men die while the Eldar live forever? Love stories like this. Want to dive deeper into the lore of Middle-earth? Hit that subscribe button and join our fellowship on Nerd of the Rings. We're exploring every corner of Tolkien's world, from the shipyards of Numenor to the battlefields of Mordor, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. Now let's sail on. The Shadow Rises. By the reign of Tar-Míriel, the fifth king, a chill wind carried ill tidings from Middle-earth messengers. From Gil-galad arrived in Armenelos, their cloaks stained with the dust of long roads, their faces grave. A new shadow stirred in the east. They said a servant of Morgoth, cunning and cruel, whose name was yet unknown. Tar-Míriel, a scholar who loved the stars more than the sword, felt the weight of the warning. His heart was heavy as he summoned his son Tar-Aldarion, whose love for the sea and knowledge of Middle-earth made him the leader Numenor needed. In the throne room of Armenelos, beneath tapestries woven with scenes of Elendil's voyages, Tar-Míriel passed the scepter to Aldarion, his voice steady, but his eyes filled with foreboding. Aldarion took the throne as the sixth king, his reign marked by the hum of preparation. The shipyards of Romena roared with activity, hammers pounding as new ships took shape, warehouses filled with spears, shields, and barrels of salted fish, ready to aid their allies, should the shadow strike. The Guild of Venturers sailed more frequently, their ships patrolling the coasts of Middle-earth, their eyes scanning the horizon for signs of war. In the markets of Numenor, talk of the East grew common, but life went on. Fishermen hauled their nets, their songs unchanged, while craftsmen shaped blades that gleamed like moonlight. In the shadow of Meneltarma, families gathered for the Eruhantale, the autumn prayer, their voices a quiet plea for peace. Yet beneath the surface, unease grew. Aldarion's voyages grew longer, his absences straining the patience of his wife Arendis, whose tale of love and loss would one day fill its own song. Tar-Míriel, now retired to his observatory in Forrestar, had forbidden the felling of Numenor's forests, fearing the island's beauty would fade. Instead, the venturers turned to Middle-earth, stripping the woodlands of Minhiriath to feed their shipyards. The Dunlending struck back their raids, growing bolder fires in the night arrows piercing the hearts of unwary sailors. Aldarion responded with force, his men driving the natives from their homes, their axes clearing ever more land. The forests of Enedwaith grew silent, their trees replaced by stumps, their people scattered like leaves in a storm. Centuries passed, and the shadow in the east revealed its name. Sauron the Abhorred, who had forged the One Ring to bend all wills to his own. His power grew in Mordor, his spies whispering in the ears of the Dunlendings, fanning their hatred for the Sea Kings. By 1200, Numenor had built permanent settlements in Middle-earth. Vignalonde grew into a fortified port, its walls bristling with archers while other havens dotted the coasts. These outposts were no longer places of learning but strongholds of power, their garrisons demanding tribute from the local tribes. The men of Middle-earth. Once allies now bowed under the weight of Númenorian rule, their resentment of fire waiting to blaze. In 1695, Sauron struck his armies pouring into Eriador like a tide of shadow. Gil-galad's forces fell back, their cities burning, their hope fading. A desperate plea reached Tar-Míriel, the 11th king whose heart burned with loyalty to the elves. In the throne room of Armenelos, he read the message, his fingers tracing the elven script. The time had come. For 5 years, Numenor prepared its shipyards, working without rest, its forges glowing red. In 1700, the Armada sailed a storm of sails and steel that darkened the horizon. When they landed at Vignalonde, their warriors marched with such might that Sauron's orcs fled in terror, their courage broken by the sight of Numenor's banners. The Battle of the Gwathlo in 1701 was a triumph. Númenorian spears gleamed in the sun, their archers loosing arrows that fell like rain. Gil-galad's elves fought beside them, their swords flashing. Their voices raised in songs of defiance. Sauron's host was shattered, his dreams of conquest broken. The Dark Lord fled to Mordor, his heart burning with hatred for the land of the star. In Lindon, Gil-galad embraced Tar-Míriel, their friendship sealed in blood and victory. The Sea Kings returned home as heroes, their ships greeted by cheering crowds in Romena, their names carved into the annals of Armenelos. But victory came at a cost. Tar-Míriel stood on the cliffs of Lindon, watching the elves, their faces untouched by time, their eyes holding the light of Valinor. A seed of envy took root in his soul. Why should the Eldar live forever, while men so mighty faced the shadow of death? He returned to Numenor, a changed man, his heart heavy with questions no prayer could answer. In the taverns of Romena, mariners whispered of the undying lands, their voices tinged with longing. The ban of the Valar, once a sacred trust, began to feel like a chain. In the great library, scholars debated the nature of mortality, their arguments growing heated, their scrolls stained with ink and doubt. The turning tide. By 1800, Numenor's ships no longer sailed as emissaries of wisdom, but as conquerors. In Middle-earth, they built dominions along the coasts, their fortresses rising like fists of stone. The port of Umbar, far to the south, became a stronghold of cruelty, its governors ruling with iron, their whips cracking over the backs of those who resisted. The men of those lands, once students, now bowed as subjects, their tribute filling Númenorian holds with gold grain and slaves. In Vignalonde, the once humble haven grew into a city of towers, its docks bristling with warships, its markets filled with the spoils of conquest. In Numenor, the laughter in the markets grew sharper. The songs in Armenelos tinged with pride. The white tree still stood, but fewer came to pray at its roots. The festivals once joyous became displays of wealth with nobles parading in robes of silk and gold, their eyes fixed on their own glory. In the shipyards, craftsmen carved prows with images of eagles and lions, symbols of dominion rather than grace. The air grew heavy with the scent of ambition, and the prayers on Meneltarma grew faint, drowned by the clamor of a people who believed themselves invincible. Under Tar-Míriel, the 13th king, the rift widened. He stood in the throne room of Armenelos, his crown heavy with jewels, and spoke openly against the Valar. The ban, he declared, was a shackle on Numenor's greatness, a decree born of jealousy. His followers, calling themselves the king's men, turned their backs on the Eldar, their hearts hardening against the old ways. They wore amulets shaped like ship symbols of their defiance, and their voices filled the streets with chants of conquest. But not all were swayed. The faithful or elf friends gathered in secret tending, Nimloth under cover of night, their hands gentle on its silver leaves. They climbed Meneltarma in silence, their prayers a whisper of hope in a land growing dark. In 2021, under Tar-Míriel, the 14th king, the divide became a chasm. The king's men sailed south, forging cruel vice kingdoms far from elven eyes. Umbar grew into a city of shadow, its streets lined with statues of Númenorian lords, its harbors filled with ships that carried slaves to toil in distant mines. The faithful, meanwhile, built Pelargir, a port of white towers on the Anduin River, a haven of hope in the lands that would one day be Gondor. Its walls were adorned with elven runes, its markets filled with the songs of the old days. The faithful dreamed of a Numenor restored, but their numbers dwindled, their voices drowned by the tide of pride. In the streets of Armenelos, tension simmered. The faithful adorned their homes with carvings of Nimloth, while the king's men painted their doors with images of ships, their sails unfurled in defiance. Fights broke out in the taverns, fists flying over words of faith and rebellion. The Eldar of Tol Eressëa came less often, their ships slipping into Romena under cover of night, their gifts, seeds, scrolls, and songs hidden from the king's spies. The air grew heavy, as if Meneltarma itself held its breath, its summit untouched by the storms brewing below. The darkness reached its peak in 2899, when Ar-Pharazôn, the 20th king, ascended the throne. He cast aside the Quenya names of his forebears, taking an Adunaic title, Lord of the West, a blasphemous echo of Manwë, chief of the Valar. He banned the elven tongues, decreeing that only Adunaic, the tongue of men, should be spoken in his realm. The faithful faced persecution. Some were exiled to the barren coasts of Forastar. Others vanished into the night, their homes burned by the king's guards. The white tree stood untended, its leaves dulled by neglect, its roots choked by weeds. In the markets, songs of Elendil were replaced by chants of conquest, and the prayer festivals fell silent, their altars cold. In the shipyards, the hammers rang louder, crafting warships with prows shaped like dragons, their decks lined with ballistae. The king's men dreamed of empires, their eyes fixed on the seas, their hearts blind to the shadow growing within. In the great library, scholars loyal to the king burned scrolls of elven lore, their ashes drifting over Armenelos like a warning. The Eldar ceased their voyages, and the western shores of Numenor grew quiet, their lighthouses dark. The land of the star, once a beacon, now burned with a different fire, one of pride and defiance, a flicker of hope. Hope returned fleetingly with Tar-Palantir, the 24th king, who took the throne in 3177. Raised in secret by his mother, a daughter of the faithful, he loved the old ways. His name, the far-sighted, spoke of his gift, a vision that pierced the veil of time. In the throne room, he stood beneath the faded tapestries of Elros, his eyes bright with purpose. He restored the elven rites, tending Nimloth with his own hands, his fingers brushing its silver leaves as he whispered prayers. He climbed Meneltarma alone, his voice rising to Iluvatar, begging forgiveness for his people's sins. Tar-Palantir's reign was a breath of spring in a land choked by winter. He ordered the streets of Armenelos adorned with flowers, their petals bright against the white stone. The Erulai Tale. The midsummer prayer echoed once more, and families gathered beneath Nimloth, their voices tentative but hopeful. In Romena, fishermen sang of the sea, their nets heavy with fish, while artisans carved new statues, swans and stars, symbols of the old grace. Tar-Palantir walked among his people, his robes simple, his smile warm, and for a moment Numenor seemed to breathe again, its heart remembering the star that had guided its fathers. But the king's men, led by Tar-Palantir's brother Gimilcad and nephew Ar-Pharazôn, scorned his reforms. In the halls of power they mocked him as a dreamer, their voices loud with contempt. Gimilcad, a man of iron will and bitter heart, rallied the nobles, their swords gleaming with defiance. Ar-Pharazôn, golden-haired and ambitious, stood at his side, his eyes fixed on the throne. Rebellions flared in the east where the king's men held sway, their banners raised against the king. The faithful were driven to the western shores, their homes marked with curses, their children taught to fear the night. Tar-Palantir's visions grew darker. He stood on Meneltarma, the wind tearing at his cloak, and saw a truth that chilled his soul. If Nimloth perished, so too would Numenor's line. He doubled the guard around the white tree, their spears glinting in the moonlight, but his power waned. The king's men outnumbered the faithful, their influence entrenched in every corner of the island. The Valar did not answer Tar-Palantir's prayers, for the sins of Numenor's kings weighed too heavily, their pride a stain that no repentance could wash away. When Tar-Palantir died in 3255, his heart broken by his people's strife, his daughter Tar-Míriel should have become the fourth ruling queen. She was a woman of quiet strength, her eyes holding the same far-sighted gift as her father. But Ar-Pharazôn, golden and ruthless, saw his chance. He led a rebellion, his banners raised in Armenelos, his voice promising glory. He seized Tar-Míriel as his unwilling bride, their marriage a mockery of love, and claimed the scepter, declaring himself Ar-Pharazôn, the Golden. The faithful wept, their hopes buried with their king, their prayers drowned by the cheers of the king's men. The deceiver's web. Ar-Pharazôn's reign began with fire. In 3261, word reached Numenor that Sauron, now styling himself King of Men and Lord of the Earth, boasted of destroying the Land of the Star. His armies raided Numenorian settlements in Middle-earth, their blades stained with the blood of the Sea King's subjects. Ar-Pharazôn, his pride wounded, stood in the throne room, his fists clenched. He would not be mocked. He gathered an armada so vast it darkened the seas, its ships stretching from horizon to horizon. The shipyards of Romena worked without rest, their hammers, a war drum that echoed across the island. In the markets the people cheered, their voices raised in songs of vengeance. When Ar-Pharazôn's armada landed in Middle-earth, its might was unmatched. The ground trembled beneath the march of his warriors, their armor gleaming like the sun. Sauron's armies fled without a fight, awed by the power of Numenor. The Dark Lord, ever cunning, saw no path to victory. Instead, he bowed his eyes, glinting with malice, and allowed himself to be taken to Numenor in chains. The people of Armenelos gathered in the streets, their cheers shaking the city, as Sauron was paraded before the throne, his head bowed but his heart unyielding. In Numenor, Sauron's chains were a ruse. His words, smooth as silk, wove a spell over the king. He spoke of lands beyond the sea, of wealth and power waiting to be claimed. He mocked the Valar, calling them jailers who hoarded immortality from men within years. Sauron rose from prisoner to chief counselor, his lies poisoning the heart of Numenor. Ar-Pharazôn, enthralled, hung on his every word, his eyes blind to the shadow at his side. The people, swayed by their king, turned from the old ways, their faith replaced by ambition. Under Sauron's sway, Ar-Pharazôn built a temple to Melkor Morgoth's master, its dome rising 500 feet above Armenelos, its altars stained with blood. The faithful were dragged to its fires, their screams echoing through the city, as the king's men watched, their faces hard. Nimloth was hewn down. Its silver leaves scattered, its wood burned in the temple's flames. But Isildur, a young lord of the faithful, risked his life to save a single fruit, his body bloodied, but his heart unbroken. The white tree's line endured, hidden in the shadows, a spark of hope in a land consumed by darkness. In the streets of Armenelos, fear replaced joy. The markets fell silent, their stalls empty, their merchants hiding behind locked doors. The festivals were abandoned, the prayer altars cold. Families whispered of the old days, their voices hushed, their eyes darting to the shadows. The faithful gathered in secret, their homes marked with hidden runes. Their children taught the songs of Elros. In Romena, the docks grew quiet, the ships now carrying slaves instead of scholars, their holds filled with the spoils of Middle-earth. Ar-Pharazôn, nearing 200, felt death's shadow creeping closer. His hair, once golden, was streaked with silver, his hands trembling as he gripped the scepter. Sauron, sensing his fear, whispered the ultimate lie. The undying lands held the secret to eternal life. The king's eyes burned with desperation, his heart consumed by the promise of immortality. For 9 years, from 3310 to 3319, he forged the great armament and armada to defy the gods. The shipyards of Romana became a city of fire and iron, their hammers ringing day and night. Forests were felled across Numenor, their timber feeding the furnaces, their stumps a scar on the land. The harbors brimmed with ships, their masts a forest of defiance, their decks lined with warriors whose eyes gleamed with greed. The wrath of Iluvatar. In 3319, Ar-Pharazôn boarded his flagship Alcarandus, its prow carved with a dragon's head, its sails black as night. The great armament sailed west. The ban of the Valar shattered beneath the king's ambition. The people of Numenor gathered on the cliffs, their cheers drowning the cries of the faithful who knelt in prayer, their hearts heavy with dread. Sauron remained in Armenelos, his laughter cold as he stood in the temple of Melkor, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The armada vanished into the mist, its fate a whisper on the wind. When Ar-Pharazôn's host landed on the shores of Aman and camped at the hill of Tuna, the world held its breath. The undying lands, radiant and untouchable, stood silent, their beauty a rebuke to the king's pride. Then Iluvatar, the One, stirred. A chasm yawned in the sea, its roar shaking the heavens, swallowing the great armament in a maelstrom of water and fire. Waves taller than mountains crashed upon the fleet, their timbers splintering, their warriors lost to the deep. Hills fell upon Ar-Pharazôn's army, burying them in stone, their dreams of immortality crushed beneath the weight of their blasphemy. The world was reshaped flat no more but round, with Aman and Tol Eressëa hidden beyond mortal reach. In Numenor the earth trembled, its cities crumbling as the sea rose in wrath. Waves crashed upon the island, their roar drowning the screams of the doomed Armenelos. Once radiant was swallowed by the abyss, its towers shattered, its streets silent. Romena's docks were torn asunder, its ships scattered like leaves. Meneltarma, the sacred mountain, stood alone as the waves closed in its summit, a final refuge for those who fled. Tar-Míriel, her heart heavy with her people's sins, raced to Meneltarma's peak, her robes torn by the wind, her eyes fixed on the sky. She climbed, her hands bleeding, her voice raised in a final prayer to Iluvatar. But the sea claimed her, a queen, lost to the abyss, her crown sinking into the deep. In the temple of Melkor, Sauron laughed as the waves came, his body destroyed but his spirit fleeing to Mordor, forever stripped of his fair form. Numenor sank into the deep, its glories lost its name, a whisper on the wind. Only Meneltarma's peak, some said, remained above the waves, a lonely isle no ship could find. The faithful endure. Few escaped the cataclysm. Elendil, a lord of the faithful, sailed with his sons Isildur and Anarion on 9 ships, their holds filled with the relics of their lost home. They bore Nimloth's seedling, its roots wrapped in cloth, and the 7 Palantiri seeing stones that held the light of Numenor's past. Storms cast them upon Middle-earth, their ships battered but unbroken. In the north, Elendil founded Arnor, its cities built of stone and memory. In the south, Isildur and Anarion established Gondor, its towers rising along the Anduin. The white tree was planted in Minas Ithil, its leaves a whisper of hope in a world of shadow. But others survived too, the king's men in Middle-earth who had built dominions in Umbar and beyond. They swore fealty to Sauron, their hearts as dark as their deeds, and became the Black Númenóreans, their legacy, one of cruelty and betrayal. One of their number would one day stand as the mouth of Sauron, his voice a mockery of Numenor's glory. The faithful, though few, carried the true spirit of the land of the star, their blood flowing in the Dunedain, the men of the west. Numenor, now called Akalabeth the Downfallen, lived only in memory. Elendil stood on the shores of Gondor, gazing through a palantir, seeking the island of his youth. He saw only waves, endless and unyielding, their foam a shroud over the past. The Dunedain built great ships, their prows carved with swans, and sailed west in search of Meneltarma, their hearts heavy with longing. But the world was round and their home was gone forever. Yet in their courage, their sorrow, and their undying hope, the spirit of Numenor endured a light that no darkness could quench. In the years that followed, the Dunedain faced new trials, wars with Sauron, the rise of Mordor, the forging of the last alliance. But they carried the legacy of Numenor in their blood, their kingdoms a shadow of the Star of the West. In Gondor, the white tree stood as a reminder of their past, its leaves catching the light as Nimloth once had. In Arnor, the Palantiri gazed across the ages, their visions a bridge to the island that was no more. The Dunedain fought, loved, and dreamed their lives, a testament to the greatness of their forebears. Their hearts forever turned to the sea. This is just the beginning of Numenor's story. Want to explore more tales of Middle-earth, from the voyages of Aldarion to the battles of the Last Alliance? Subscribe to Nerd of the Rings, hit the bell, and share your favorite Numenorian moment in the comments below. Let's keep the legend alive.